Hey everybody, Amy here from Elysian Acres Soap, and today I'm going to show you how to make my favorite soap ever, Jurassic Soap. I actually originally made these bars for the Soap Challenge Club in September of 2020, and I won second place for those. So I've changed the way that I make these bars now, and I'm going to show you both ways. The first way is by hand modeling the bones like I did in the original, and the second is by using a clay extruder to make basically canes of bones that go all the way throughout your soap. So here you can see this is what the hand modeled bones look like before they go in the soap. And then this is the little guy that comes out of the extruder. I designed and 3D printed my own set of extruder discs for a clay extruder, and they just made it possible to make these really cool, very intricate canes of soap dough that I'll show you in just a little bit. But first, here we go with the hand modeled bones. So this is soap dough. What is soap dough? Soap dough is just regular cold processed soap that has been kept airtight during the saponification process so that it remains pliable and moist, very much like modeling clay or Play-Doh. So I have another video coming where I will show you how to make that. I promise it's coming soon. So first we're doing the skull, and I don't know, it's kind of a T-Rex, kind of just a vaguely reptilian skull. You can get it more detailed if you want. This is the first step that I do. I just make a little rectangular block about 1 inch wide, and then I use this is actually a fondant tool, but you can just use a pencil or something to make kind of a channel throughout there. And what that is the eye socket of the animal. You want it open at the top so that your fresh batter, when you pour it in, can really seep into that crevice and give it that look of an eye. And so now I am just sort of figuring out my size, what I want it to be. And then we're going to add teeth. So this is actually just the top half of the skull. I make these in 2 pieces, and then I glue them together with melted cocoa butter. That's my little secret that you'll see a lot in this video. So I'm just cutting out the teeth, and again, these don't need to be perfect. Just have fun with it. You know, I'm not a paleontologist, but my grandfather actually is, and he's the one who inspired me to make my original Jurassic Soap bars, and he does often tell me that my skulls don't look correct. But I just brush him off. It's okay. He's allowed to criticize. He's about the only expert I know in the field. So I'm moving to the lower jaw now and just cutting out little teeth. And they don't need to be perfect. The way I see it, these are supposed to look like fossils that have been underground for 1 million years. So if they're kind of jagged and craggy and just not perfect, that's okay. Just have fun with it. So this is the lower jaw, and now I'm seeing that it's way too long. It looks more like, I don't know, crocodile or something. So I'm just trimming it down, playing with it, smoothing out those edges. Still too long, needs a trim. And then that's about right. So at this point, I'm going to use my melted cocoa butter, and you'll see it here in just a second. And by just dabbing a little bit of cocoa butter right where you want those 2 pieces to meet, and then allowing it to cool down. And see, it just takes a teeny tiny little bit. And cocoa butter is really very solid at room temperature. So as soon as it comes up to room temperature, it glues it together pretty well. And then when it's in your soap, that excess cocoa butter just absorbs into the rest of your batter and just disappears beautifully. So there's a little trick for you. It makes amazing glue. So until that cocoa butter comes up to room temperature and solidifies, you just want to set it down just gently in whatever position you want it to be glued, and leave it for about an hour. I guess it depends on how warm or cool your room is. One thing I like to do, because I live in Colorado and it's pretty cold outside right now, I'll just set it in a windowsill so that the cool air flows on it and it solidifies real quick. So this is now the little bones. So I have just made about a 1" by 1" square with extras on the side, and then using the blunt edge of my knife, make a little crease, and voila, it's a little bone. Those are so easy to make, and they make such cute fillers throughout the soap. So I like to make a lot of those because they have a lot of impact in these bars with very little effort. And moving on to the rib cages now. So same with the skull, just about a 1" by 1" rectangular prism, I guess, cube. And then start to cut out kind of just a little T shape, a little cross shape at the top. And what this creates is your first rib. It's a lot easier just to create one rib and then glue the others on than to try to cut out more than one on this same backbone. Trust me, I tried that. It was hard. So this is the easiest way I've found to do it. So just squeeze it down now, give it a nice little taper, make it look a bit more like an actual rib cage, and you can see now where I'm going with it. It's starting to take shape. So now I'm going to cut out a couple more ribs and just stick them on. And while this soap dough is nice and pliable, it will actually just adhere to itself if you can smoosh it on there hard enough. I did go ahead and put a little cocoa butter on these to help them stay together, to make sure they stay together. But if you have patience and time, they will adhere if you just smush them together, very much like clay, like modeling clay. So there's the last of the bottom ribs. Now I'm cutting just little bits to make those little bumps on top. And that's our rib cage. Last little piece, and ta-da! So moving on to the next way of making these bones. This is a clay extruder. You can buy them really, really cheap on Amazon or lots of places. And again, these are custom 3D printed dies that I created, and I do plan to get those on Etsy soon for sale if you're interested in those. But I just love this new technique of doing it. It makes the bars so much more consistent, and you'll see that it's really easy just to crank out a bunch of bones and fill up your soap. I love it. So this is the top half of the skull, and I'm going to use that good old cocoa butter trick again to do the same exact thing. I extrude the skull in 2 pieces, add a little bit of melted cocoa butter to that jaw hinge area, and glue them together. And as you're extruding, you just want to gently guide it with your finger to kind of help it straighten out. If you start out with it curving, it's just going to curve all the way around and probably rip on you. So just go slow and easy with it. And there's the lower half of the jaw, and there you can see how they go together. So little dab of cocoa butter on it, set them together nicely, and then just let it harden. One thing I wanted to note when you're using cocoa butter as glue like this and then putting it into fresh soap batter, I'm sure if you've ever worked with fresh soap batter before, you know that it gets pretty hot. It can heat up very quickly as the lye and oils start to react, and cocoa butter will obviously begin to melt in those high temperatures. So that is one thing to note when you're using cocoa butter this way, is that you want to soap a little bit on the cooler side, and also to pour gently over them so that it doesn't scoot out of the way. So there's the ribs, again in 2 pieces, little cocoa butter, stick them together, and let it dry. Here's a little triceratops skull. And then just little bones. So I do a lot of canes of these bones throughout the whole body of the soap, but then I also make little tiny slices to use as little decorations on top. So for the skull and the rib cage, I like to glue those together as well, just so they don't move around in the final soap very much. So same thing, dab of cocoa butter, let it harden. And here we go, time to assemble. So this is going to be my extruded cane soap. You can see how long I do. I do the same process you just saw, but I just do it for the entire length of my mold. We have our little dinos ready to go. It is important, for me at least, to have everything laid out in the order that I want to put it in the mold before I start. Otherwise, I forget everything. So here's my hand-modeled batch, and you can see the importance of the width on there is about 1 inch wide, and I make sure to place these in on the cut lines of my soap so that when you slice your bars, you're going straight through those nice big embeds, and they take up, the majority of your bar. So I'm going to be making both soaps at the same time and sort of going back and forth so you can see the same basic technique and really just see all the differences. So I am making all of my soap batter right now. I've just added my lye to my oils, and I am hand stirring only. And since these bars are made up of lots of different layers, and I do not want all of my batter to thicken up yet, I am not even mixing to emulsification at this point. I am simply mixing to make sure that my lye and oils are combined but not emulsified, so that I can have a lot of working time with my batter. So for my first layer of my first soap, this is just about 2 teaspoons of activated charcoal, and I give that whole batch of batter just a quick mix to make sure that you're getting a nice combination in there, and then measuring out enough for my first layer. And this is my fragrance oil. This is actually rosemary mint fragrance oil from Nurture Soap. And so I've pre-measured it for all of my batches, and I'm just adding out enough for 1 layer. Again, you don't want to add a fragrance oil into all of your batter just yet, because that can make it accelerate, and then you won't be able to achieve those nice layers that you're going for. So before I even stick blend, I'm getting everything nice and lined up and ready to go. And then here we go. Just a very quick pulse with the stick blender is all my batter needs. I know my batter comes to trace very, very quickly. So again, this is just, you need to know your batter, how it compacts. And in with that first black layer, and then the first canes go in. So just one of the simple little bones, and then here we go with the T-Rex. I guess let's call it a T-Rex. There it is. So I'm going to set that aside, let that black layer harden up just enough to add the next one. So here we go on the second loaf. So this is going to be the hand modeled loaf. And you can see I only have half of the bones ready to go at this point. So black layer, and time to put those little ribs in. So these bones, you want to make sure that you put them in sort of to the side at an angle, so that that nice fluid batter in your mold can really sink between those ribs. If your batter is too thick, or if you just plunk them straight down, you're probably going to get air bubbles caught up under those ribs, and you'll just have little gaps in your soap. So as you put it in, just give it a little swoosh to the side to make sure that batter can flow underneath all of the bones. And I'm trying to make sure that I have these bones lined up on those cut lines that I've already marked on my mold. But as you can see there on that 1 second to the left, I didn't quite get it. And you'll see on the final cut that it didn't quite slice all the way cleanly through, but that's okay, because as you use the soap, those bones will reveal themselves, and it's pretty fun. Last little bones in. Use your chopstick just to guide them in place. And again, just kind of bring that batter over. And now it's time to set it aside for 10-15 minutes until that first layer has solidified enough before we go in with the next layer. So back to the first batch. That one's set up just enough. And here we go with the brown layer. This is Mocha Brown Mica from Nurture Soap. And I'm adding that fragrance in again. And I have not stick blended yet. Just giving it a quick little mix. And there we go. Real time. This is all I'm blending. That's it. Very, very quick. You want your batter to stay nice and fluid so that you can do this. Just gently pour down one side and let the batter flow into all those little cracks and crevices. You want to go pretty slowly on this one, just so you're not pushing things out of the way. Here we go with our little triceratops. Give it a little swoosh. Let that fluid batter fill up all those gaps between the ribs and the eye sockets, all the little cracks. And some more simple bones. I really like these because it doesn't really matter what position you put them in. They look cute and at all angles. So setting that one aside, back to the hand modeled one. First layer has set up, and it's time for the skulls. Same process, measure out that oil, add fragrance, give it a very, very quick blend, and then pour gently. Now, you remember what I said about the cocoa butter can melt and shift when it comes in contact with your nice warm soap batter? You see it right there. There it was. Did you see it move? One of those bones heated up and just decided to dance around a little bit. I don't mind it because, again, this is fossil soap. It's supposed to look like it's been underground for a million years. So, you know, your skeleton's not going to be perfect, is it? And then in with the skulls, again, just swooshing to the side to let that batter fill up that whole mouth and get between the teeth. Help it poke down, get that batter into the eye socket there. I like to do every other bar on these, alternating the skulls and the rib cage, because I really think it's fun when you have a bar of soap that has something different on both sides. So I'm doing skulls on every other cut line and ribs on every other cut line. So each bar has a skull on one side and a rib cage on the other side. There we go. Give it a little poke down. Try to get those cut lines lined up. And adding just a little more batter to make sure those eye sockets get filled up. Simple bones. And they look really crowded up, but remember, when you're looking at the cut lines, you're only going to see that on one side. So here we go with the next layer, and this is a bit more complicated. This is going to be the drop swirl layer. So I'm making 3 pots of batter at the same time, and you want them all to maintain about the same consistency of a nice thin trace. So this is my last brown layer. I know it doesn't look very brown here, and that's actually because I'm not using any mica at all in this layer. Instead, I use about a half a teaspoon of instant ground coffee. So it doesn't look very brown here as batter, but it makes a beautiful speckled look in the cured bars. And then I'm mixing up simultaneously 2 different greens. These are both from Nurture Soap. The bright green is called Enchantment, and this lovely darker bluish green is called Rainforest, both by Nurture Soap. First, go in with that brown layer, gently pouring it over, because we don't want that cocoa butter to melt and get pushed out of the way too quickly. And then after you have this layer in at a nice thin trace, it's time to come in with your greens. So using this horizontal motion, I'm just dropping in that batter from fairly high up because I want it to penetrate down into that brown layer a good bit. So just for fun, I'm adding a few more little bones into this layer. And then I'm going to come back in and alternate my 2 green colors and continue this drop swirl. I was actually really impressed that that green matched so well with the green of my mold. So much so that you'll see a little bit later that I accidentally piped the top onto my mold where I didn't even mean it to be because the color matched so well. And then here we go with the last hand modeled batch, same process. 3 pots, mix them up, all to be the same trace. In with that brown speckled coffee layer and a drop swirl. So after you finish your drop swirl, all of your green pots should have a little bit left in them. What I do is I pour them all together and I let them solidify together like this. So these have been sitting here for about 20 minutes. And again, that's just those 2 greens mixed together, and they come together to make this very nice grassy green. So once it's a really nice thick trace, I scoop them into a piping bag. So this is a disposable Wilton piping bag. Well, it's technically disposable, but I use them over and over and over, and I just wash them out in between. But you just squeeze it down in there, and then this is the Wilton piping tip. I'll find the number and I'll put it on the video, but it's the one that looks like grass. So what we're going to do on the top of both of these batches is just begin to put a nice grassy layer. And this soap is not set up, it's just barely set on top. So piping on top, well, it'll have no problem adhering. And do you see what I'm doing here? I've just gone way over the edge and I'm just piping straight onto my silicone mold. Oops. So for this tip, you just give it a gentle squeeze while pushing down, and then as you pull up, release pressure on the bag, and it just makes that nice tapered little grass appear. And then I'm going to switch to a leaf piping tip. Again, I'll find that number and I'll put it on the video for you. And so you just hold this one sort of horizontal to your mold. And the same concept, you give it gentle pressure at the bottom, and as you pull up, you stop squeezing the bag so that it makes a nice, cute little tapered leaf. So after I pipe these leaves, I go ahead and add in little flowers. These are simply little soap flowers that I cut from scraps of other bars of soap. I just cut very thin slices and then used little flower-shaped cookie cutters to cut them out. And these are the little bones that I cut from the canes. Just poke them all around. There's not really any right or wrong way to do this. Just have fun with it. And yes, I took my gloves off. I couldn't stand it anymore. I'm sorry. Don't do that, guys. But I'm being very, very careful not to touch any of the raw soap pattern. And then now we're going to go to super high speed because this felt like it took absolutely forever. And yes, piping all that grass will absolutely make your hand ache. So be prepared. Little flowers, little bones. This part's fun. Now, before we let this soap go to bed for the night, I am just going to use a little bit of mica and oil just to make little tiny dots in the center of those flowers. It just gives it a little more depth and a little more fun. When I cut out those flowers, I went ahead and used just the end of a little tool to give them a little indent in the center for this very reason, just so it makes a little pool to hold that mica and give it a little shine. And here they are the next day. I went ahead and put these in the oven, and I allowed them to go through gel phase, and it's time to cut. This is the hand-modeled bar. Ta-da! I love these little guys. They have such a special place in my heart. And there you go. You can see how each bar has something different on both sides. And there's that little naughty bone that moved out of place. You could see it. And one more cut. Yes, my multi-bar cutter is missing some wires. It's sort of on purpose. There we go. And now for the second loaf with the extruded bones. I did speed this video up just a little bit because I was moving so slowly with these wires. I was so worried about breaking my wires, and you can see that it really is straining on them, but they made it through no problem. There you have it. I love them. I love them so much. So the really nice thing about those canes is that every single bar in this batch has a very consistent look to it. They all have the same number of little skeletons, and I just couldn't be happier. So which one do you like better, guys? Do you like the hand-modeled bones, or do you like the canes? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.